I'll turn my audio off. Okay.
Okay. Uh, well, this is going to be our Hebrew class starting from the very, very beginning. And my name is Gregory Smith, and I've been teaching Hebrew for about 25 years and off and on. It's been a very rewarding study for me. And I taught classes in our Torah studies here in Michigan for about 3 or 4 years. And then I went out to Iowa and I taught Hebrew there. And I facilitated some Torah studies. And then I went to South Carolina and I've been there for about 10 years. And I did the same thing, essentially. And now, most recently in Greenwood, South Carolina. So the very first thing that one wants to do in studying Hebrew is to get a good grasp of the Aleph Bet. And I have a very good Aleph Bet sheet here that we can look at. Okay, and notice that this says it's Sephardic pronunciation. So what that means is this is more rooted in Middle Eastern pronunciation, unlike perhaps other Hebrew programs that would be Ashkenazi. So it's not quite as original, I guess is the best way to describe it. Original. Original Hebrew, older Hebrew, is Hebrew that is spoken by people even today in the Middle Eastern regions. Not those that had to migrate into European countries, where a lot of the languages that were in the European countries throughout the centuries developed, it began to sort of merge with Hebrew. And so this is how we get, for example, Yiddish is sort of a mixture dialect of Hebrew. It's got a lot of German in it, and so on and so forth. So this is more rooted in original biblical Hebrew. So this is why it says Sephardic. And everything that comes from my resources, where I get these materials, you can find these at, if I can get my slate proper here, www.e, oh, that's an E, KS, publishing.com. Okay, and they have even things like comic books, to get your kids interested. You got some neat stories. I'll show you what one of those looks like right now. Let me see if I can just as an aside here. Come back to my documents and open this up here. That's one that I've been thinking about doing called Og the Terrible. There we go. Og the Terrible. So you can look at the side panel here. You can see the various, it's got a lot of neat art, but it also has a biblical message you will find in many of these comic books that come from EKS Publishing. And there's a lot of them. Just imagine what you could do with these materials in getting kids interested in Hebrew. And of course, adults, if they wanted to start from the very beginning, this might be a good resource. So these are just some of the things that are available via EKS Publishing. Now, again, we'll go back to the Aleph Bet and look at some of these letters. Now, there are 26, get my little pen here, 26 Hebrew consonants. Okay, so for example, 26 consonants. And there are 4 twin letters. And I will show you as we go down. And then there are 5 final letters. Okay, So there's quite a bit to familiarize yourself with, and this is really the only part of the study that requires rote memorization and just practice and repetition, just to get the letters memorized. Because once you get the letters memorized and you get the sounds, of course, will be memorized with the letters, then you begin to read, and it gets considerably easier. So we'll start here at the very beginning with something we call a silent letter, and this is an Aleph. And usually to write that, I will make a sort of a slanted here, and I will give it a stem from the bottom quadrant and on the right-hand side, and a stem coming down from the left-hand side. And so we get Aleph. And the reason why they call that a silent letter is because if there's any kind of pointing around it, that's the sound it makes. But the letter itself makes no sound. It's silent. So, for example, one of the pointings that you may have seen is something that looks like a bar. Well, that's called patah. And it's an ah sound, as in the English word yacht. Ah sound. So then, really, when you look at this entire thing, this part here, the Aleph, even though it's a consonant, you don't hear it. It simply goes right to this bar symbol, which is ah. And so what this would sound like is simply ah. It doesn't matter what pointing is there. You would only hear the vowel pointing, not the consonant itself. So that's what they mean by silent letter. Okay? So then, moving down here, we have our first set of twin letters, and you'll notice that they look the same except that there is a dot in one of them. Well, that little dot right there, we call that a dagesh. D-A-G-E-S-H, dagesh. And it hardens the letter. So, for example, the letter here is a bet, and there it is spelled out for you, bet, B sound. But if you look at this letter, it's the same letter, but it has no dot or dagesh in the letter. It softens and becomes vet. Essentially, it's the same letter. It's just that there's a slight alteration depending on whether or not there is a dagesh inserted in the letter. So bet or vet. That's why they're called twin letters. Okay? So let's move down to the next one. And we have Gimel. Gimel. And there it is written out for you. G sound. G as in girl. Gimel. Okay, moving down, we have another consonant we call dalet. Okay, let me write the gimel for you. I usually start like this, and I come down and give it a leg, and I come out with a leg here. I do it again for you. Okay. Okay, so let's look at dalet now. So dalet is the D sound. And what I do is I give it a stem like this, and you want to come back a little bit and then go like this. You have to make sure that it has this little edge on it. Otherwise, it could be confused with another letter that we're going to run into shortly. Okay, so dalet. And what I would recommend is writing each of these about 12 times and then saying them. Because I like to, I think that retention is better when you have three modalities of learning in operation. What do I mean by modalities? Is that we learn, everyone has a strength or a weakness depending on whether or not they are seeing something, hearing something, or doing something. In other words, the teacher is showing and then the students are following along. a teacher might be writing on the board and they're seeing the writing, but every student has a different percentage of whether or not they do better retaining the information by seeing it, by hearing it, or simply by writing it, doing it. So in order to encompass all people, I try to encourage people to not only write it, but to speak it. And they're seeing it as they write it. So they're getting all three in. And that helps retention. So for example, if you wanted to do Dalit, we would go like this. Dalit. You know, on your own time, Dalit. Dalit. Okay, and that helps retain information so that we can move on to the next steps, which is actually getting into the grammar. Okay, so we have this letter down here called a hey. Okay, and I usually start like this, and you want to give it sort of a, you want to make sure that there is an opening here. Okay, to distinguish that from another letter that we're going to see. Then we have Vav. Okay, you'll see that there's another V sound. Here's one here, Vet. They both have V sound, but they're different letters. Okay, so then we just sort of give it a, sort of like that, Vav. Then we have this one here, Zayin. Zayin. And I usually put sort of a little tilted roof here and a stem going straight down like that. No, that's not quite straight, but you get the idea. Try it again. There we go. Zayin. Okay. And then we have chet. This is our first guttural. Now, it's spelled like chet, but that's not how it's pronounced. It's pronounced chet. It's sort of a deep down in your throat, almost like, you know, you're coughing something up. Chet. A hoarse guttural sound. Chet. And so then to write it, I just do sort of like that. I guess you could give it a little bit of an overhang here if you want. But it's distinguished from hey in that, notice that hey has this little opening here, and het is just closed there on that part. Okay. Move on down here. Let's see. If I can get it, there we go. Okay, so now we have something here called tet. Okay, and to write that, I usually just put like a sort of a slant down like this, and I come around like this. Tet. T sound. Okay. Then the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet would be yod. Okay, just sort of a little dot here and put a little tail on it. Yod. Okay, now we have a couple more twin letters. Okay, and so the first one, you notice that there's a dot in there. We call that a dagesh. We call that kaf. And let's see, I'll go over here and write it sort of like an inverted C with a dot in there, makes that kaf. But if you don't have the dagesh in there, it becomes less hardened, but it's still considered a guttural, so it's called chaf. Chaf. Okay, now they've got it. If you see it written out, sometimes you might see it written out like this, C-H-A-F. Chaf. Okay, but it's part of this twin letter set here. All right, now, so then what is this here? Well, we have encountered our first final form letter. So what does a final form mean? What's the point of that? Well, if you have a Hebrew word that starts with a chaf, that's this one here, starts with this, it's this one here. Let me clear this board up for you a little bit. Okay, so let's try this again. If we have a Hebrew word that starts with this letter, it's going to be in this form. But let's say you have a Hebrew word that has a chaf in it, but it turns out to be the very last letter of the word. It instantly transforms into something we call a chaf sofit, or final form. S-O-F-E-E-T. Final. Okay? So there are 5 of these, and you just have to recognize that if one of these letters that also has a final form ends up at the end of a word, you'll see it in the final form. But if it's in the middle, if it's in the beginning of the word, it's going to be the regular form right here, chaf. Okay? That's what we mean by final form. Okay? And here is lamed, sort of like a shepherd's crook. And I start that up like this, and I come around like this, and I give it a little sort of like that. I'll try it again. Takes a little bit of practice. There we go. Lamed. And it's a L sound. Okay. Now we have mem. Okay. An M sound. And how I usually write that is I give it a little foundation here, and I come around. I give it a little tail sticking off to the left there, and we get mem. Okay. So again, mem has a final form. It looks similar to its regular form, but notice the regular form has this little gap down here, and the final form is closed at the bottom. So that's the difference. So for example, let's say the word for water in Hebrew is mayim. Well, there are 2 mems in that word. So it starts out like this. Okay. Regular mem, ah, it has a yod in it. There's a chirik, but it ends with mem too. So we can't use this form because this is one of those final form inclusive letters. So then we put this in there. Okay. Mayim. Oops. M-A-Y-I-M equals water in Hebrew. And there's a famous song. Actually, I was singing that with my son the other day in the car. It's the Mayim, Mayim, Mayim. And it repeats Mayim several times. Ushabta Mayim, Besason, Hine Ha Yoshua. And then it goes on, Mayim, 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 Hey Mayim, Besason, and so on. Water, water. We shall draw from springs of living water. So that's an example. I like to use that word sometimes when I'm teaching about mem. Okay, so let's go down to this one here, noon, N sound. So then with a noon, I just sort of go like this and try it again. Noon. Noon. And notice that noon also has a sofit form, but it extends below the imaginary line. Okay? And just like chaf sofit does, extends below the imaginary line there. Okay? Noon sofit. So if a word has noon in it, if it shows up at the end, it's going to be this final form right here. If it shows up anywhere else, it's going to be in this normal form in the word. Okay. So now we have another guttural letter. We call this samech. Samech. And I write this, I put the little top on here and sort of give it a bold character. We'll try it again, little top on here. Give it a little bit of a bold character. Samech. Okay. All right, now here is our second silent letter. Ayin. Ayin. So, for example, it's sort of like an inverted Y. That's kind of what it looks like to me. We'll try it again here. Give it a stem there. Ayin. So then, just like the Aleph, let's say you had a pointing on there that was a dot. That dot we call a chirik. And so all of this together would make an E sound. E. That's it. You don't hear this part because it's considered silent. It only has the sound of the pointing around it, just like the Aleph. So that's what that means by silent letter. Okay? It's kind of unique. When you compare Hebrew to other languages, this has a lot of idiosyncrasies to it when you think about it. Okay, now is our next set of twin letters. We have the first one with the dagesh in it is pei. That's this one here, pei. And I usually just kind of give it the middle part and I come around like this, put a dot in there, and we get pei. But if we do it without the dot, the dagesh in there, it softens and becomes fei. Fei. Pei and fei. Okay? And then notice that fei happens to have a sophete form. So if we see fei at the end of a word, it's going to transform into this right here. And it also extends below the line. Okay? Fei, sophete. Okay? Down here, our TS letter, we call this zati. Zati. You hear the zati. And so to write that, I usually just start up like here, and I come around like this, and I give it a stem. I come down sort of an angle, sort of looks like a, I don't know, give it a stem like that. Okay, T, S, A, D, E, E. You've seen it translated perhaps like that. Sometimes they transliterate like this, T, S, A, D, I, C. Sadi. Okay. It also has a final form, okay? So if you see this letter at the end of a word, it's going to transform into this final form, and it extends below the line. Okay. All right, we're getting right down to the end here. Now, this next letter here, we call this kof. And I would actually prefer that they were to have a Q there, Q-O-F. That's really a closer approximation. So this kof is kind of tough to, let's say you've got a line here. How I usually write it is let's see, you got some lined paper here. You take the, there's this piece here, and then this piece that comes around like this, and then goes down like this. I'll try it again here. There we go. Q-O-F, kof. It's more of a Q sound, really. It seems to be, of all the letters, the toughest one to write, I think. But maybe you'll differ with me. Okay, so we have this letter, resh. Resh. Okay, sort of an inverted R. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory there. All right, and here is our fourth set of twin letters. We see these a lot. In fact, the word shalom starts with one of these. And these dots, they call these supralinear dots. Supralinear. Superlinear. Okay? So, for example, the word shalom, you sort of give it a bowl, give it a stem coming out of the left quadrant, superlinear dot on the right-hand tine. Okay, give it a lamed, give it a holem, shalom, mem sofit. Shalom, meaning peace or wholeness. Okay, so what about this one here? Seen, seen. They got it almost spelled out like sin, but it's more like S-E-E-N. That's how it really is supposed to sound, seen. Okay, and then sheen, S-H-E-E-N, I think is a better transliteration for that, sheen. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we have tav, T sound. Okay, and we come like this, and I leave it a little bit of an overhang here, and then we give it a foot. And that's what distinguishes that letter from, say, a chaf. That little foot right there is how you tell the difference between a chaf. For example, here's a chaf. Oops. C-H. Oh, I meant chet, het rather. Here's a chet, and here is a tav. They're similar, but the tav has this little foot. I'll do it again. Give it a little foot. That's a little bit of a long foot, but you get the idea. Tav. Okay. All right. Any questions on the alphabet? Figure out.
No, that was great. I've taken lots of notes and it was very clear. Thank you.
Okay, so so that is what I would suggest you start with. And I think what we'll do to finish this class is just go over some of the vowels, because you can practice sort of putting these vowels together with the letters. And so our vowels are on this right-hand column here, okay? Mm-hmm. And for example, this first one here, the X there is not a Hebrew letter, obviously. That's just, what that means is you can put any of these letters. If I were to circle that all the way down, I'm running out of page here, but any Hebrew letter goes where the X goes, and then this little bar right here is the important part that you want to pay attention to. So for example, this is called a patach. And let's say you, well, let's put a bet in here for bayit. Here's a bet, b sound. And we want to put an ah sound in there. We would put what's called a patach. And so together, both of these together form the sound ba. Ba. You see that? So any letter, if you wanted to put a zayin in there, let me try to get this a little better here. Okay, so here's a zayin, and we put a patach under, we would get za with both of them. Z sound plus ah sound makes za. Okay? Now, we notice here in the next one, there is the same sound. So what's the difference? Why the difference? Why do they have to complicate matters and have two separate pointings for what to the ear sounds the same? Well, one happens to be what we call a long vowel, and one is a short, and it's A class or A class. But they both have A sound, okay? So the other one that is the long class is comets. And you can see them written out here. Comets. A as in yacht. Okay? All right, so now let's go to this little dot underneath the letter. This is called a chirik, and there it is written out for you. And it's spelled in Hebrew for you, chirik. And let's say we want to start out with the letter bet again. And if we put a chirik under it, we get B. That's what that sounds like with a bet and a chirik together. B. Okay? Let's look at this one here. We have two dots under any of these letters. Let's say if we wanted to sound out, let's say, the word hay, as in hay is for horses. Well, in Hebrew, we could use a hay, which is the H sound in Hebrew. And if we put these two dots underneath it, together, that sounds like this. Hey. See that? Okay. And it's called a saray. That's the name of the vowel. This written out right here, in all these other places, that's the name of the vowel. And sometimes, actually, it's very useful to memorize the names of these vowels, not only because the sound of the vowel is in the name of the vowel, but when we are going through Hebrew, I might be pointing something out by name, and it's useful to know when I say, look at this chirik under here, you will be familiar to know what I'm talking about. So that's why I suggest that the name of the vowel should be learned as well. Okay. Let's go down. We're almost to the end here. We've got this one here, 3 dots and a triangle. We call this segol. They've got it written there. Well, let's say we were to use the letter mem, and we put a segol under it. Well, together, the sound that this would make would be meh. Meh. Okay? Any letter at all. If you put those 3 dots under there, it's going to be a eh sound, as in the English word bed. And there's the name of it, segol. You hear the eh in segol, and there it is written out in Hebrew for you. Okay? I'll get down to my mouse here. Okay, just a few more here. So now we have this other vowel pointing that can be written both ways. It could be written with this vav included, but what we're really paying attention to is this dot right here at the top. Or it can simply be put on the top left-hand side of any consonant. And we call this cholem. And it's O sound, as in the English word row. So for example, if we were to put a lamed here, and let's say we were to put a dot on the top left-hand side, the top part of this, together, this would make the sound low. Lamed with holem makes low. Sometimes we might see the word shalom written this way. Here's a sheen. superlinear dot on the right-hand side. Kametz. Here's our lamed. And we see the holem as a dot to the left-hand side of the holem. And it, as the lamed, rather, as the lamed, left-hand side of the lamed. And it ends with mem sofit. Shalom. Okay? It just depends which way you see it. You might see it in this abbreviated form. You might see it including on top of a vav. But in this case, because we've got this vav here, this transforms into being part of the vowel. Let me clear that out again. I'll say this again. This becomes part of the vowel. And you don't hear a V sound in here at all in this case when you have this dot on top of the vav, because it's technically it's called a mother of reading, and it becomes the long version of the vowel. And so you don't pronounce V like you ordinarily would as vav, a consonant. It simply is O sound. Holem. Okay? Now, let's go to what looks like these three little dots at a, I don't know, at an angle, I guess, underneath there. We call this kibbutz. Kibbutz. And we have OO, as in the English word pool. So, we'll put another bet there. We'll throw a kibbutz on there. And what do we get together? Boo. Okay. And finally, we have something called a chataf kametz. Okay. In this case, the kametz ceases to become an A sound, because you notice up above we looked at kametz, but it was a regular kametz and it was A sound, as in the English word yacht. In this case, it transforms into an O-class vowel. We see this in the word kol. For example, all, or the voice of all Israel, kol Yisrael. You might see that a lot in prayer books. Kol Yisrael means all, or all the voice of Israel. And it uses this vowel. So, for example, let's see here. We'll put a kof here. And then I'm trying to get two dots line up here next to this, what looks like a cross character. And together we get Q, O. And then if we were to throw a lamed on there, kol. Okay? Remember, we're reading from right to left. Okay. All right. So then finally, a vowel that we want to practice is a shava. And there's two forms of the shava, and I will go into detail about these two forms. One is called a silent shava. The other is called a vocal shava. And the shava does quite a bit in grammar, and we will look at that. So anyway, I think that's enough for today. We covered the Aleph bet. We covered the vowel pointings. Now, I think it's worth noting that there are some other vowel pointings that are not included in here, but these vowel pointings are the ones that are used the most when you look at the biblical text. So if we run across some ones that are not used very often and they have not been listed, I will point them out and give you the same descriptions for them as I did with these. Okay. All right. It's been a pleasure here with this teaching. Any questions or comments?
No, thank you. That was really brilliant. And like you said, I'll do all the practicing. I'll write it all out 12 times and But no, I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Now, here is what we're going to be looking at the next time I do this lesson. Let me show you what this book looks like. It's called Prayer Book Hebrew the Easy Way. It's 3rd edition. This can be found at Amazon.com. Of course, I'm not sure how you would get this book in countries outside the United States, but the thing is that because these are going to be recorded, really, worst comes to worst, even if someone didn't have the book and they just had an internet connection with YouTube, they're going to see the whole book anyway on YouTube as I start with this book. And let me give you an example. Just before I leave, I'm going to give you an example of what people will be learning eventually, being able to accomplish eventually if they stick with this. Here is an example of a common Hebrew hymn that you may hear either in synagogue, but also in Messianic assemblies and in the Yahad as well. I use this in Greenwood, and I've taught the people in Greenwood this little hymn. So let me show you. This is called Ein Keloheinu, okay? So it's got, let me get my little pen here. So you'll be able to follow along when in Hebrew, when you get enough of this under your belt, so to speak. Let me get my, okay, so, and this I've done, I've handed this out to people. It's got the transliteration. Here's the transliteration. Here's the English translation. And here is the Hebrew text. So we have Atahu Eloheinu and Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Now, you may have heard this song before. Let me break this down to a smaller page so I can get the whole page. Try 100. Let me get this smaller than this. 85. There we go. Okay, so now we've got the whole thing seen. So this song goes a little bit like this. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. And then we go up to the first stanza, stanza number 1. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kamalkeinu, Ein Kamoshienu. And then we go down to the stanza again, or the refrain. I'm sorry, the refrain. And each stanza says something different. So, for example, Mi Keloheinu, Mi Kadonenu, and it's that same tune. So this is an example, a brief example of what the kind of things we're going to be learning. And of course, we have the musical part to it too. So, Baruch Hashem. Very well. I think that's good for today.
That's great. I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. You have a great
Bye.
night. And Yah willing, we will see the folks back again next time I announce the class.
Yeah. Thanks a million.